a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Organic Man Coffee Trike has the best coffee in the universe. Don't take my word for it. Don't take my word for anything. Do your own investigating. Drop by 4501 McPherson and hand them some money, and they'll hand you the best coffee in the universe. If Laredo's a little out of your area, you can go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop and get the best coffee in the universe. Saturday, August 17th, from 9 a.m. until 8 p.m., there will be the UFO Con in Jefferson, Texas. That's con for convention. Daryl Sims, the alien hunter, will be the big guy speaker, along with Mitch Whitington, J. Michael, Dr. Rita Lewis. Daniel Allen Jones is going to be one of the speakers, as well as the MC. If you've never heard Daniel speak, he is a very interesting person. Somewhere in that bunch of people, they're going to squeeze me in for a couple of minutes. You can't get much stranger than Strange Things live and in person. That will be August 17th, a Saturday, in Jefferson, Texas, which is over by Marshall. The Jefferson's a small town. Well, I guess Marshall's a small town, too. Swing by if you want to see what I look like in the flesh. I'll have some of my books there to sell. I like watching The Repair Shop from England. It's one of those channels for a few weeks, and then they took it off so they could put some other show on about a bunch of naked people being eaten alive by swarms of mosquitoes. There's no figuring out other people's taste. I really wonder, how do they get things like that on TV, while at the same time, why do people actually think that reality TV is real? Act like the film crew isn't there while being sick as a dog from food poisoning. The one I get a kick out of is when they try to convince the audience that people seeing a person walking along with a film crew and a guy carrying a boom mic and a production crew all telling the person how to walk, how to act, how to do this, that, and the other thing. And yet, somehow, this is supposed to be real? People don't have film crews following them around unless there's something really weird going on, like they're criminals or politicians. Well, in the repair shop, I know it's staged mostly, but they still have a lot of really interesting things brought in to be fixed. Old things. Steve is the horologist. No, that's not what it sounds like. Some of you have dirty minds. A horologist is a person skilled in fixing clocks and watches. He also works on other mechanical devices. It's amazing to watch him take something apart, put it all back together, and it works. I usually take something apart and I have a bunch of extra parts left over at the end. I find the show very relaxing to watch. His sister, Susie, is a saddler. She fixes saddles, but she also does anything with leather. There's a guy named Steve also who works on music boxes. Don't get one Steve mixed up with the other. One has hair. Will is a woodworker. He can take a piece of 2x4 oak and make it actually look like something. I try fixing things around the house, and sometimes I actually succeed. I took the freewheel off of my bike, cleaned it, replaced the bearings, greased everything, oiled everything. You can't put grease in a freewheel, you have to use oil. And it worked. The gears shift and the freewheel works like it's supposed to. On the repair shop, they got a guy named Tim who works on bikes, but he usually works on antiques like penny farthings and things like that. If it needs fixing, they have somebody that knows how. There are the bear ladies. No, that's bear as in Bear. They work on teddy bears, stuffed toys, things like that. They redo any stuffed animals that come into the shop. Judy and Amanda. I am slowly managing to memorize everybody's name on the show. That's how often I watch it. In fact, I've gotten to a point where if Oak Island, Skinwalker Ranch, Blind Frog Ranch aren't on, I'm probably watching YouTube and The Repair Shop. I know it's TV and some of the acting is just unscripted script. The production team try to get most out of the folks being filmed. They tell them not to stick their tongues out while they're thinking. Don't pick your nose. Avoid touching certain parts of the human body. But still, it's an interesting show. The things being fixed are kind of the stars, and the people doing the fixing, well, they just make the story more interesting. The bear ladies get a lot of really old stuffed animals from a century or more ago. I have to guess as to what the toy might be sometimes until it's back together. The people bringing in the toys are something else. Some are just getting a family heirloom repaired, while others are getting their best friend mended. I've heard the bear ladies called the bear doctors a few times. I wonder how much emotion has been loaded into these toys over the years. In the early 1900s, when teddy bears were first becoming a hot item, some church leaders renounced them, saying that these stuffed creatures would steal the affection between a mother and child. Now I have seen some kids that find a lot of comfort with their toys, sometimes more than with humans. Could this be a problem we don't recognize or just a way of dealing with life? Some kids are so attached to these fake animals they sometimes believe they're alive. A Calvin and Hobbes kind of thing. How many of y'all that read Calvin and Hobbes believe that Hobbes is a real character? Or how many of you think that he might be a shape-shifting elemental? Old Hob was another name for the devil. If a small child thinks his or her toy is real, treating it as such, and focusing hours, weeks, years of attention on this one item, what could be the consequences? A tulpa is a thought form brought to life by people thinking it into becoming real. Then there's the oscuros, beings from who knows where that are invisible and they're looking for a host. Maybe these things can slip in and take possession of a toy and then make life interesting. Just how powerful is the human mind? Nobody knows for sure. But there's a lot of evidence things can be done using just our thoughts. Dr. Owen assembled a group of 8 people to perform an experiment. The group became known as the Owen Group, consisting of the doctor's wife, who was the former chairperson of Mensa. There was a industrial designer, an accountant, a housewife, a bookkeeper, and a sociology student. The group's first task was to create their fictional historical character. Together, they wrote a short biography of the person that they named Philip Elsford. The fictitious character was an aristocratic Englishman living in the mid 1600s at the time of Oliver Cromwell. He had been a supporter of the king and a Catholic. He was married to a cold and frigid wife named Dorothea, the daughter of a neighboring nobleman. While out riding on the edges of his estate, Philip comes across a gypsy encampment. There he meets a beautiful woman named Margot, not the character from Despicable Me. Philip falls in love with her. He secretly keeps her in the gatehouse near the stables of his family home. Eventually, Dorothea realizes that he has been keeping a woman of negotiable affections, and she goes looking for her. She finds Margot and accuses her of witchcraft and stealing her husband. Philip was too scared of losing his position in life, his reputation, so he lets Margot go to trial, be convicted of witchcraft, and found guilty, so she's burned at the stake. Now, keep in mind, this is all just a made up history of a fictitious character. Philip is stricken with remorse, allowing his one true love to die, while he sat and did nothing. One morning his body is found at the bottom of the battlements, and what appears to have been a suicide. The Owen Group enlisted an artist to draw a picture of what Philip would have looked like. September 1972, the group began their experiment by performing a seance. They would discuss Philip and his life and meditate on him and try to visualize their collective impression of him as being a real person. These settings were conducted in a well lit room, and they went on for almost a year with zero results. Some members of the group did say that they had felt a presence in the room, but there was no result that they could consider an actual communication with Philip. They decided to change their tactics. The group began working in a dimly lit room. They sat around a table and they sang songs and they surrounded themselves with pictures of the type of castle that they imagined Philip would have lived in. They also had objects from the time period brought in. During one seance, the group received its first communication from Philip in the form of distinct raps on the table. The spirit identified himself as Philip, and he began answering their questions. The sessions just kept getting more and more real from there. None of the scientists studying the group could figure out any explanation other than Philip was now a real ghost. The group was able to learn finer details about Philip's life. He even seemed to exhibit a personality, conveying his likes and dislikes, his strong views on various subjects made plain by how quickly or enthusiastically he would answer with his knocks. Philip was a creation of the group's collective imagination. Although he could accurately answer questions about events and people in his time period, it was pretty much limited to what the group knew about the time that he was supposed to have lived. Some members thought that they heard whispering coming from the corners of the room during their seances. They weren't able to ever catch any voice recordings at the time. Recording equipment wasn't nearly as sensitive as it is today. Philip's psychokinetic powers were amazing and completely unexplainable. If the group asked Philip to dim the lights, they would dim instantly. When asked to restore the lights would come back up. The group noticed that the table felt different to the touch whenever Philip was present, having a subtle electric quality. On a few occasions, there was a fine mist formed in the center of the table. The climax of the experiment was a seance conducted before a live audience of 50 people. The session was also filmed as part of a TV documentary. Philip did not disappoint. He did table rappings and he made other noises around the room, turned the lights on and off. The table came up off of the floor. The entire audience could see it from all sides. There was no way of faking it. The Philip experiment gave the Owen group far more than they ever imagined, but they could never get Philip to actually manifest in physical form. The Toronto organization decided to try recreating the Philip experiment. They created a new character named Lilith, who was a French Canadian spy. Other similar experiments conjured up entities named Sebastian, a medieval alchemist, Axel, a man from the future. All of them were completely fictional, yet all produced unexplained communication through their unique raps. A Sydney, Australia group created the Skippy experiment. The 6 participants created the story of Skippy Cartman, a 14-year-old Australian girl. The group reported Skippy communicated with them through raps and scratching sounds. Ask yourself, just what was going on with these experiments? A group of people focused on a fictional person, and it begins to communicate with them. A fake ghost was able to move objects and form into a mist. Think about those invisible beings from some other dimension. They just might be using the ideas of fake ghosts to create their own entities for some bizarre purpose. It's something we can't imagine because we don't think like alien beings. Too much time and too much money is being spent by people trying to decipher alien intentions when they're aliens. The people doing these experiments did not work on them 24/7. They only got together maybe once or twice a week, and then only for a few hours. A child with not much to do in the way of a job, and usually before school is in their lives, has only a few things to focus on: eating, sleeping, and playing. Playing with a stuffed animal that is to them very real. Kids sometimes have a hard time focusing on just one thing, especially if it doesn't interest them. Put a TV show on that they like and you can't drag them away from it. Just how much brain work does it take to create a fake ghost or a living stuffed animal? Most of the time, the stuffed animal is perceived as a protector. In a dark room with La Mano Peluda just a few feet away, the stuffed animal is there to keep that hairy hand to himself. The things hiding in the closet can't get to the child with the stuffed animal there to keep them guarded. The toy becomes the best friend and protector of the child. How about when the toy is a scapegoat? When things get broken, it's the toy's fault. The Steiff Company is best known for bringing the teddy bear into the world. They made a lot of stuffed animals and many things never intended to be a toy. One creation of theirs was a stuffed figure used in window displays. It was kind of a human-looking form in a clown suit. I'm not afraid of clowns, I just don't like them. They're creepy. Mm. Anyway, I do like Puddle's Pity Party, though. He's a good singer. If you've never heard him, check him out. He's got some bizarre songs, and he's got some rather nice songs. There was a small figurine sent to a store to be put in a window, but it wound up in somebody's home instead. A boy named Eugene Otto wound up with the toy, and he would dress it in an old sailor suit that he had worn when he was a bit smaller. Eugene was inseparable from his doll, which he began calling Robert. Robert went everywhere with Eugene. Eugene Otto began to blame mishaps on the doll. Anytime something had gotten broken, it was Robert that was to blame. As Eugene grew older, his attachment to Robert didn't diminish. While most boys were out playing baseball or running around town, Eugene was still playing with Robert. As an adult, Eugene lived in a home that he called the artist house. Robert had his own room in the attic, with windows looking down on the street. Children would tell their folks that they had seen Robert looking down on them from the windows. They would tell their parents that they had seen Robert move. Robert would be away from the window even when Eugene wasn't there to move him. Some kids began to believe the doll was alive. It must have been cursed. Myrtle Ryder purchased the artist's house after Eugene Otto died in 1974. She became Robert's new caretaker. Visitors swore they would hear footsteps up in the attic and giggling. Some claimed that Robert's expression would change when anybody badmouthed Otto. Reuter said that Robert would move around the house on his own, and after 20 years of antics, she donated him to a museum. Since Robert arrived at the museum, visitors have been flocking to get a look at this possibly cursed toy. He appeared on TV shows, and he's had an aura photographed. He's a stop on many ghost tours in the town, and he's inspired a horror movie called Chucky. Fans can buy Robert's replica, books, coasters, T-shirts, and the most adventurous folks out there can volunteer to be locked in the museum with Robert overnight. He gets letters and email all the time. It turns out he's more popular than Strange Things. Gee, I feel so great knowing that a doll gets more email than I do. I'm not being critical of Robert, just in case he does listen. You can get a selfie with Robert, but you have to ask first. You don't ask the staff at the museum, you have to ask Robert. If you don't, the photo will be distorted. Whatever you do, don't badmouth him or his former owner. Or is it a caretaker? They say if you say something unkind, Robert will get even with you. You will have a run of bad luck, as if you pissed off some old gypsy lady. The museum receives letters from people begging Robert's forgiveness. They said something stupid while looking at the toy, and now they want him to lift the curse that he has placed on them. A few people have even tried to get Robert to curse other people that have wronged them. Man, that's cool. I should try that. No, not gonna do. I don't play with Ouija boards. I don't deal with cursed toys. Folks discovered that Robert has a sweet tooth, so they leave candy in the museum for him. He received a box in the mail containing 8 bags of peppermints and a card with a no return address. Guests leave him sweets, money, and occasionally a joint or two. The staff have a very long aversion to taking anything that has been mailed to Robert. If it's near his display or addressed to him, it belongs to Robert. I wonder what they do with all that stuff. Squirreled away in the back room somewhere. How is it a straw-filled human effigy has become so lifelike that he has his own Facebook page? He has a lot more followers than Strange Things as well. I have to wonder, did Eugene Otto focus so much attention on Robert that he somehow infused the doll with some other worldly energy. Another story I've heard is the Otto family had a nasty habit of mistreating their servants. One day, a Haitian servant was fired after Mrs. Otto saw her practicing black magic. She was planting things that might have brought the family good things or maybe bad. There's no telling when it comes to things like that. Well, before the maid left, she gave their son the doll, which is now known as Robert. She may have given it something a little special before leaving. She somehow managed to get the doll from the window display at the store, but there's no record of her either buying it or stealing it. Nobody knows for sure. Eugene Otto was so fond of the doll that he began going by the name Robert himself. Mandy was made in 1900. Just a doll with a porcelain head and a lot of stuffing. The person who first bought the doll is unknown. There are two stories that go along with Mandy. One is about the doll being found, and the other is that the doll is a family heirloom. Either one could be true. The doll was the pride and joy of some young girl in Canada. Maybe in the 1930s or 40s, a man was walking past an old farmhouse when he thought he heard a young child crying. It was coming from inside. The man knew this old house was abandoned and that nobody had lived in it for years. He thought maybe some kid was lost and had taken refuge inside, so he went to try to help. He knocked on the door and he yelled that he was there to help and for the child to come out. Getting no answer, the man had to force the door open. The building was empty, but he could still hear the crying, now coming up through the floor. The cellar access was from the outside, so he ran to the side of the house and managed to open the doors. Down in the darkness, he moved around, trying to find the lost child. What he found was a long dead girl clutching a doll. The crying stopped as soon as he saw the body. The authorities were called and they examined the scene, but they could find no identification for the girl. Nobody knew who had lived in the farmhouse around the time of death, and so the body was buried in an unknown grave. For reasons that I cannot come up with, the man took the doll home. I know this sounds strange, but I've met a few people who have no issues taking things found near the dead. Look at some antique collections. Many items were removed after the owner died and nobody came to claim the belongings. Sometimes a person will die and their furniture or possessions will be sold to pay for the funeral. I don't like antiques. I don't buy antiques. I don't want any antiques in the house because you don't know what might come with them. The doll became an item of interest on display in the man's home. Nobody knows why it became known as Mandy. Not being a very good looking doll, it was moved from the living room to a box in the basement. Weird things began to happen. The owner's wife began waking in the middle of the night to the sounds of a young child crying. There was no young child in the house. The bizarre sounds would echo up through the halls from the basement, and sometimes it was so loud she couldn't ignore it. Once the owner worked up the courage to investigate, she discovered that the crying was coming from the box where the doll was. This was just too spooky, so the doll was donated to the Quesnel Museum. The second story goes that the doll was owned by the great grandmother of the person who donated Mandy to the museum. The great grandmother was the one who gave the doll its name. The doll was very old and fragile, and the owner was afraid that her daughter would break it, so she sent Mandy, without bothering to give her name or return address, to the museum. The curator took the doll out of the box and immediately felt uneasy. She chalked the feeling up to the fact that the doll had an incredibly creepy look to it. The face was something out of a horror movie. To me, most dolls are like that. Mandy was realistically painted and had glass eyes, but the forehead over the doll's right eye was cracked, causing the eye to protrude slightly. Mandy was taken to the museum's workshop to undergo some maintenance before it could be placed on display. The doll was enclosed in a plastic bag to test whether bugs had infested it. If you watch the repair shop, you'll see them do this all the time. They'll take a stuffed animal, they'll put it in a bag and squeeze all the air out of it, and then put it in the freezer for 24 hours to kill any bugs that might be inside. As the folks working in the room were waiting for the doll to be cleared of any bugs, they swore they could hear movement coming from inside the bag. They would look at the bag and then look away, and when they looked back, it looked as if Mandy had changed positions. They all convinced themselves that this was just their imagination getting the better of them. After Mandy was free from any bugs, the doll was photographed for the records. The next morning, when the staff returned to the workroom, they found it had been messed up overnight. Small objects had been thrown about, and the larger objects had been tipped over. Any time Mandy was left in a room by herself overnight, the room would be a mess the next morning. The curator likened the mess to what would happen if a child had thrown a tantrum. When Mandy was finally placed on display, she was the first thing visitors would see as they passed the entryway. They would mostly feel uneasy when looking at the doll. There seemed to be something incredibly wrong with it. At times, photographs taken of the doll would not turn out. They would be blurred or they would have strange light anomalies all over them. I got to the point that the uneasiness felt by the visitors and the staff, they decided to place Mandy in the back corner of the museum in her own glass display case. Eventually, a psychic inquired if she could hold the doll and see what might be picked up. Upon reading the doll, the psychic felt that it had suffered much abuse. But it was not the doll who had suffered, but the previous owner, and that the previous owner's spirit was now inhabiting the doll. The psychic was the one who had told that first story of the dead girl found in the cellar. The staff and volunteers at Quesnel Museum were constantly having weird things going on around them. Their lunches would disappear from the fridge only to be found later stuffed into a drawer somewhere. Pens, pictures, books, display items began disappearing without a trace, and many of them have never been found. Mandy had to be kept away from other toys in the museum. Any doll within the room would wind up mangled or destroyed. In 1999, the museum and Mandy were both featured in a book called Supernatural Stories Around British Columbia. Ishmael has a doll that is on loan from its owner. A woman living in my neighborhood has an enormous doll collection. Every room in her home is filled with dolls of all shapes and sizes. The woman had contacted the LPRS wanting an investigation to prove that her dolls were more than just toys. Ishmael asked if she was having any problems, but she only wanted documentation that these dolls were active. The team set up motion activated cameras in many of the rooms and they waited. Nothing much ever happened, leading to a long, drawn out investigation. Nothing like what you might see on TV, the people running up and down the hallway screaming as lights are turned on and off. Now, that's just Hollywood. Really, most ghost investigations are kind of dull. But you want them that way. Excitement in a ghost investigation can be terrifying. Once a few weeks' worth of audio and video had been taken, it was time to review everything. This is the longest and by far the worst part of the investigation, yet this is where any actual evidence is going to be found. One of the dolls, sitting on a bed in amongst several dozen others, is seen to close and open its eyes. The eyes are weighted, so they do this if the doll is moved, but they don't blink by themselves, only when the doll is placed on its back. Now, Ishmael took the doll home for further study and to show at a guest event. The doll was placed in a closet for safekeeping, but wasn't there a few days later. Ishmael had to search his house in order to find it. It was in another room. The next time it wound up moving from the closet to the garage by itself. It's just him and his wife, and neither one of them is much into pranking each other. To keep the doll from wandering around at night, it wound up locked in a plexiglass box with a chain around it. I want nothing to do with this creepy toy. I ask Ishmael if he's brought the thing to any events that we're at, so I know never to stand anywhere near his display. 4 generations ago, Anna's great grandmother received a doll that she named Joliet. Just an ordinary toy given to her by a family friend. At the time, Anna was pregnant with her second child. The family friend wasn't all that nice. It turns out that she was extremely jealous of some perceived thing from Anna's family. Maybe this other woman had a thing for Anna's husband, or maybe she wanted kids but couldn't figure out how to do it on her own. Now, keep in mind, this was a long time ago, and some mothers never had that birds and the bees discussion with their daughters. There are people out there that think getting pregnant is some kind of a magical ritual where certain things have to be done. These are the same folks that keep getting pregnant but can't figure out how or why. How you go about getting a cursed doll and why is something for another show. Maybe I'll ask David Griffith. I could ask Victor Manson and get into a long, drawn out discussion on who and why we might want to experiment on. This sounds like a subject for the Paranormal Rundown. Ask JJ who he would like to give a cursed doll to, as long as it's not me. If y'all are listening, check it out. Find out how do you get a item cursed. I might do a show on it myself sometime. Speaking of cursed dolls, did you see the TV show The Night Gallery, The Doll? Season 1, episode number 5. It was one creepy show. I've talked about it in the past, but it had a profound effect on me and my brother. We were staying in a tent in the backyard that night, and we watched TV and then went out to bed. Late in the middle of the night, somebody wearing Converse tennis shoes came and they stood just outside the tent opening. We could see the rubber toes under the flap. The gate to the yard made a horrendous noise when opened or closed, and if you jumped it, you would still make a lot of noise, since the gate was only a few feet from the tent. We never found out who it was, but we both kind of thought it was something to do with the show. Back to Anna and her doll. Anna's great grandmother was pregnant and about to give birth when the family friend gave her the doll. Something to remember the day by, as if giving birth wasn't memorable enough. What was not known at the time was the friend who gave her the present was jealous. It is not known exactly why this friend was jealous, just that she was. The doll, given out of bitterness, had been cursed, and tragic events began to take place within the family. The first child had been a girl. This time, Anna's great grandmother gave birth to a healthy boy. All seemed normal until the third day when the boy died. Anna's great grandmother started to experience a haunting that emanated from the doll Joliet. She would hear a baby wailing cry coming from the doll. As she listened to the doll cry, it would bring memories of her deceased son, memories that began to haunt her. All night long, she would hear the doll crying. This led to her not getting any rest. She knew there was something unhealthy about keeping the doll, but she felt that she could not get rid of it. She thought maybe it was the spirit of her dead son trapped inside crying out to her. For years after the tragedy, the crying doll continued to keep her awake at night. She didn't think it was necessarily a bad thing. She thought somehow she might be to blame and she had to keep that doll safe. It was the spirit of her dead son, after all. When her daughter became an adult and was about to begin a family of her own, Anna gave the doll to her as a family heirloom. The daughter was aware of the idea that her younger brother was trapped in the doll. She'd heard it from her mom. She mostly thought that her mother was just having issues about the death of her son. Soon the daughter was expecting, followed by the birth of her first child, a son. The family was overjoyed and they had no issues with the mother was once more expecting. The second child was a daughter who lived for 3 days. Then she died. The following day, the doll began to cry. Once more, the mother was kept awake all night by the sound only she could hear. This time it was the daughter, yet still the second child that had died. Nobody else could hear this crying, only the mother who had just lost the child. Well, her son grew old enough to find a wife, and the doll was handed on to the daughter-in-law as some kind of a weird gift. Why? I can only think that the second mother thought the idea of the dead sister's spirit should continue with her brother. The daughter-in-law gave birth to a daughter, followed by a son, who died on his third day. The doll went on crying for years after this. Each member of the cursed family had cared for the doll like they would have cared for their own son or daughter, had they survived. Anna, the current owner, has had a son and one daughter who died on her third day in the world. Anna was kept awake for years listening to the crying doll. Her husband thinks she's just imagining things, just like his mother and his grandmother and his great grandmother before her. Anna is still convinced all those dead kids are somehow trapped or maybe just residing inside the doll. Once Anna's son gets married, Anna plans on giving the doll to her daughter-in-law. She thinks this is the right thing to do, even though the second child to the new couple is destined to die on its third day, just like all the others, followed by the mother being haunted by the sounds of a dead baby that only she can hear. Speaking of crying kids, why is it when people go to a restaurant with their kids and the kids start acting up, the parents act as if nothing is going on? Nothing makes a pleasant evening out with my wife so enjoyable as listening to some kid having a meltdown. When your kid starts crying in public, it's time to go. Just saying. I am not fond of the sound of crying kids, and I sure the heck don't like it when they're running around acting like little monsters. I will ask the waitress a lot of times when we go to a restaurant to please seat us in the non-crying section. 2008, a family in Florida bought an Elmo Knows Your Name doll for their 2-year-old son, James. When the stomach was squeezed, the doll would recite pre-recorded phrases. When the name of the child was said next to the doll, it would remember the name, it would record it, and it would include the name in the phrases. Modern technology is great until it screws up, and then it can be a very bad thing. James played with the doll a lot until the batteries began to run down. The mother popped the new set in and returned the toy to her son, who immediately squeezed the Elmo doll. Instead of saying the usual inane phrases, the doll said, "Kill James." The boy didn't get it, but the mom was shocked. She figured she must have misunderstood, so she had James squeeze the toy again. And the doll said, "Kill James," once more. Just what every 2-year-old boy needs to hear. The mother pulled the batteries out, wiped the contacts off, and put them back in. The doll was still threatening her son, so she swapped out the batteries for new ones. The toy was still saying bad things. You know how kids are. Soon James was walking around repeating the Elmo threats. A 2-year-old saying "Kill James" all over the place. Still being threatened, the mother took the Elmo back to the store to find out what was going on. They had no answers. The doll just kept saying "Kill James." Finally, the store gave the mother a cash voucher to buy anything else in the place, and they kept the killer Elmo. The doll was sent back to Fisher Price so they could see about why this one toy was being a problem and were there any others like it. The real Annabelle doll doesn't look anything like that thing in the movie. That creepy thing in the film was just made so that the audience would feel more threatened by its appearance, and the film company didn't want any problems using a real Raggedy Ann doll. The Annabelle of legend was a Raggedy Ann with red yarn hair, a flowered dress with a white apron, and a red striped set of stockings. There are thousands of dolls just like it all over the world. So far, only one has ever tried to kill anyone. In 1970, Donna was a student nurse and her mom gave the doll to her as a birthday present. Donna placed the doll on her bed, and that should have been that. When she got home, the doll was in a different location. Donna thought she must have moved the doll and went on with her life. The next day or so, the doll was found in different places about the apartment. This got Donna to thinking that somebody was pranking her. Her roommate Angie swore that she had never touched the doll. When out on the town together, the two students would return to their apartment and find the doll in the living room. On a few occasions, it was standing up against a chair or up against the wall, which Raggedy Ann dolls don't stand up. There's no structure inside them that would allow them to stand, and yet here would be this doll standing in the living room. One time, Donna found a message written on a piece of parchment paper. The message said, "I miss you," in a child's handwriting. Donna knew that she didn't have any parchment paper, and Angie said that she didn't either. A few days later, Donna found blood on the doll's hands. Not knowing who to turn to, she enlisted the help of a psychic medium to hold a seance to find out what was going on. The medium contacted the spirit that was possessing the doll. It said its name was Annabelle, a 7-year-old girl who used to play in the field where Donna and Angie's apartment complex now stood. Annabelle's lifeless body had been found in the field, but nobody was ever convicted of the crime. Donna and Angie thought it would be the right thing to do to permit the spirit of Annabelle to stay with them and to continue possessing the doll. Never a good idea, but I wasn't there. Angie's fiance, Lou, didn't much care for the doll, and he told them so. One day, while sleeping at the apartment, he awoke to find his body was frozen. He was unable to move, but he could see the doll was standing near his feet. As Lou watched, the doll began to move up along his legs and step up onto his chest. The doll walked up to his neck, bent down, and tried to strangle him. Lou woke up again, this time to find the doll was nowhere in sight. He thought that just maybe this had been a bad dream of him waking up and then waking up again, but then maybe not. On other occasions, Lou heard something moving around in Donna's room. He opened the door and he saw the doll was sitting on the floor by the bed. As he walked towards the doll, a sound behind him startled him, so he turned, looked over his shoulder, and when he looked back into the room, the doll was gone. Lou felt an odd burning sensation on his chest, and he opened his shirt and found he had scratches deep in his skin. Donna came to the realization that the spirit might not be an innocent 7-year-old, but maybe something a little worse, something a lot worse. She contacted the Episcopal priest who got in touch with the paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens told the priest it was time to perform an exorcism at the apartment. Donna decided the doll was a menace, and she asked the Warrens to take the Raggedy Ann doll with them. It has been in their possession ever since. Annabelle is now located at the Ed and Lorraine Warren Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut. But the museum is closed right now, and I don't know if it's ever going to open again. There is a big sign on the door to the cabinet that Annabelle is stored in that says, "Do not open." Thinking about this one, I'm wondering, why did the Raggedy Ann doll become possessed? I'm pretty sure that Donna's mom did not place a curse on her daughter. Reasonably sure. Things don't just become cursed on their own. I thought long and hard on the possibilities. Somebody working at the factory that made the doll placed a curse on it for some random unknown reason to go to some person that they didn't know and give them an interesting life. I find this one hard, but not impossible to believe. Maybe somebody working at the store where Donna's mom bought the doll did the dirty deed. Still, the idea of somebody performing a ritual in the aisles of a store just doesn't seem practical. And once more, why curse some random person that they don't know? This leaves me with the idea a spirit wandering the area spotted the doll and decided to inhabit it. Do elementals have this ability? There are things known as transient spirits that come and go as they please. Why don't we have more incidents of suddenly possessed toys? The Elmo doll and the Raggedy Ann doll were both just plain old toys bought in a store with zero intention of placing some evil spirit in them. The person receiving the toys might have unintentionally done something or said something and somehow managed to change the toy into something else. But how can you accidentally curse an object or accidentally entice a spirit into a toy? I don't much care for coincidences. Too many times there's something else going on that makes things happen in a weird order. I am currently reading a book by T. Kingfisher. It's called Nettle and Bone. It's a fairy tale horror story. That's the best way to describe it. I'm not going to tell you the situation leading up to this part in case you want to or are already reading the book. Just understand that the characters are in a building with a bizarre owner. One of them is telling the others why something weird is happening. She says, someone gives a lonely child a toy, and they pour all their hopes and fears and problems into it. Do it long enough and intensely enough, and then it just needs a stray bit of bad luck, and the toy wakes up. I started working on the show Saturday, and I read that part of the book Monday. A mere coinkydink or something else? T. Kingfisher writes some of the creepiest, most entertaining books I've ever read. The Hollow Place is about as unique and fascinating as any story I have ever sat down to. How she gets her ideas is a wonder. I have yet to read a book she has written that didn't keep me up late at night trying to get to the end. Quite a writer. She writes the books that I wish I had written. I used to listen to Clyde Lewis a lot. He came on at 9 p.m. and he filled in the night before Coast to Coast came on at midnight. One night, Clyde was telling about an investigation he went to in an old house. The people living there were having some odd occurrences and they wanted to find out why. The team did all the things you're expected to do. Some would break away from the group and they would try EVPs and EMFs, hold a camera on one place and snap several photos and see if anything shows up. I don't remember if the investigation was being broadcast live or if they were just playing recordings, but they did talk to the folks there, and Clyde was going over evidence and stories from the location. There was a doll in a box sitting on a shelf. It could be heard talking in the background once in a while. While doing an investigation, you don't need additional sounds to get mixed in with any recordings. So one of the team opened the box and pulled the doll out. I think they said it was a clown doll, but like I said, it was a long time ago. The member flipped the doll over, opened the battery compartment to pull the batteries out, only to find there were no batteries. The doll kept talking throughout the rest of the investigation, even with no power source. Pupa, which is Latin for doll, was made for a little girl in Italy in 1920s. The girl grew up but kept the doll with her until the day she died in 2005. The little girl who owned Pupa often told people that her doll was alive and it had a will of its own. She said that her and Pupa would talk about things throughout the years, that Pupa held all of her secrets and was a help in hard times, and had even saved her life. Pupa and her owner traveled quite extensively throughout Europe and the United States. At the end of World War II, the little girl's grandmother passed away, so as a memento and a way of remembering her, a button from her grandmother's clothes was sewn on Pupa's dress. After she died, Pupa began acting up. Some reports of her activities included steaming up the glass case in which she was kept on, and then writing Pupa Hate on the inside of the glass. She's known to push things off shelves, and she moves around from place to place, presumably to scare the pants off of the new owner. Her owner said that they caught the doll walking on her own in a video. But when they tried playing the video back, all they could see was a white mist on the film and then the words, "Poopa, no." David told me this next story, and it's in my book, Paranormal Laredo. Here is what he said. When I was 7 or 8 years old, we lived on Camp Street in Laredo. My mom used to have a doll that looked like a real baby. She used to take care of it like it was real. She would clean it with a cloth and comb its hair. I didn't like this doll because it looked creepy, and every time I would get near it, I used to get this eerie feeling as if it was staring at me. On a few nights when I couldn't sleep, I would see the doll walking around in the backyard. I told my sister, and she said that she had seen the doll walking along the kitchen counter from time to time. She was about 10 or 11 years old at the time. After being terrorized by the doll for a few months, my mom locked the doll in the closet. She secured the door with a chain and a lock. We didn't understand at the time, but many years later, my mom told my sister that she had seen the doll walking around the house and it had scared her near to death. To keep the doll from moving around the house, she locked it in the closet. We thought it was weird because she used to take care of the doll like it was her own child. Now ask yourself, how do toys become haunted or cursed? What is going on that can cause a child's toy to become something other? How about disembodied voices used in a podcast? I wonder if Vicar Manson has ever woken up in the middle of the night to find Annabelle Lee looking at him from the foot of the bed. How much emotion, how much pain, suffering, happiness, joy, whatever, how much emotion do children pour into that one toy that they have with them? Why do children begin to think that certain toys are alive? What is actually going on out there that we can't explain? If anybody has any theories, ideas, or answers, send them to me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread it around. Let other people know they should be listening to Strange Things as well. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy one of my books at Amazon.com. The Laredo Paranormal Research Society, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal, Paranormal Laredo, and Paranormal Stories. And if you've got a good, bad, or otherwise UFO story that you'd like to see in print, once again, send it to me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.